As a former intelligence officer, I've tracked threats we face for decades. New technologies like bioengineering and artificial intelligence enable small countries, terrorist groups, or even dedicated individuals to create weapons of mass destruction. But the worst threat we face in the United States is arguably our government that is actively killing thousands of Americans now and setting us up for massive deaths and a collapse by their irresponsible, horrendously bad policies. In the next few minutes, I'll highlight some of the 30 documented examples of how our government is working to kill us. Our government no longer follows constitutional limits to power and is focused on pandering for votes, which leads to funding very bad programs to buy votes from lobbyists and special interest groups. This is why our government funds gain of function research to create more deadly viruses and even publishes instructions so anyone can create more deadly viruses. They gave money to potential enemies like China to help them develop deadly new viruses. They lie about the inevitable H5N1 pandemic that is coming, partly due to this dangerous gain of function research, and they refuse to warn or prepare Americans for this inevitable, potentially imminent, deadly pandemic and the collapse that will result. They refuse to harden our fragile electric grid that is vulnerable to destruction by the thousands of enemy agents that are allowed in this country, solar flares, cyber attacks, or small nuclear attacks that North Korea, China, or Russia can easily execute. Despite experts warning that 90% of Americans could die, the campaign donations of utility company lobbyists and fear of losing votes from higher electric rates keeps career politicians from doing the right thing to protect our lives. You can read a detailed, documented report on these examples of how our government is working to kill Americans at the link shown here on medium.com. Our government provides collapse survival protection for top elected and government officials at Mount Weather, Raven Rock, and other sites, but provides no civil defense for citizens. The government stockpiles survival food for top government officials and politicians, not citizens. Worse, executive orders allow them to steal food from citizens if they need more. No, this is not a fabricated conspiracy theory. It is policy set by executive orders. Government agencies are authorized to steal food and resources from citizens in a collapse. Their number one priority is protecting themselves. Citizens are not just expendable, they are exploitable, a resource for government to raid if their stockpiled supplies run low. The unconstitutional, unlimited cesspool of regulations at all levels of government doesn't just damage the economy and inflict losses that cost people income, jobs, and lifespan. They make it increasingly harder for citizens to prepare for collapse survival. In public history textbooks written by taxpayer-funded professors, big government politicians are the good guys fighting against evil, greedy businessmen. The Iron Triangle is the official political science term for the bad alliance of government bureaucrats, elected career politicians, and special interest group business lobbyists working together to promote their profits and interests. Big businesses and campaign donations to politicians are indeed often very bad, but there is a far worse alliance that has destroyed good American constitutional government and personal liberty. That's the perverted triangle of government bureaucrats, career politicians, and lawyers. The latter two are often the same person, attorneys and legislatures that pass laws and regulations that generate more business and income for fellow lawyers, more laws and regulations and jobs for government bureaucrats, more campaign donations and power for the career politicians. And many perverted triangle members become lobbyists. Constitutional limits to federal government interference in social matters and personal economic affairs were illegally eliminated in 1937 when a majority of the Supreme Court justices surrendered to pressure and threats from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. Later Democratic administrations, along with Republicans, let the perverted triangle surge in power with massive increases in unconstitutional social and welfare programs, an explosion of laws and regulations, undermining family and personal responsibility and dividing the nation. There is not a government conspiracy to deliberately kill citizens, but because of lobbyists, career politicians, always running for reelection and prioritizing campaign donations and votes, the lack of any constitutional limits to government spending and policy since FDR coerced the Supreme Court into abandoning constitutional limits to government, a new, very bad system of government has evolved. The end to constitutional limits on government has led to massive growth in political power, career politicians, and entrenched self serving government bureaucracy, uncountable thousands of new laws and regulations benefiting lawyers. Today, any program or regulation with billionaires or an influential interest group behind it can be passed, even when it threatens and takes the lives of the silent majority. The perverted triangle has approved a multitude of unconstitutional, divisive social programs that benefit them but divide the nation and threaten civil war. The socialist welfare state the perverted triangle has built undermines marriage and families, promoting a subservient, irresponsible populace, higher crime, long term poverty and dependence, yielding a higher domestic homicide death rate. Big government overspending is driving national debt to a level that will bankrupt the country and lead to an economic collapse. Millions of government social and welfare workers are hired because they generate votes, while not enough police or Army National Guard members for peacetime security or collapse recovery operations are funded, since there is no big lobby group and campaign donations behind them. The perverted triangle and the elimination of natural rights and limits to government have yielded a socialist state and a dependent population that will largely not survive a bad collapse. The worst result of unlimited government and the perverted triangle is that government no longer does its proper job of protecting citizens from threats they cannot handle on their own. Simply put, the perverted triangle's unlimited power and focus on their political battles, pandering for votes in their benefit, leads to hundreds of thousands of citizens being killed annually now, and Americans set up for annihilation in a collapse. Without an end to the perverted triangle's unlimited political power and focus on re-election and pandering for votes with pork and social programs rather than prioritizing national security, most Americans are unlikely to survive the coming collapse. My qualifications include I'm a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, an intelligence officer. I served in the senior executive service in the Department of Defense at the nation's top federally funded research and development center. Got a master's degree and PhD in public policy from Harvard University. I founded Fortitude Ranch, the nation's largest survival community, and I consult to help organizations get ready to survive a collapse because our government is not working to protect us. Their policies are killing us now and will lead to the death of hundreds of millions in the coming collapse.